Mr. Smith. And initiate this workshop meeting that's been advertised, appropriately so. And board members, you know, we'll do the same routine. I'll just go through each item on the agenda, and I'll read as fast as I can. But if you need to stop me, or if you have questions or input, that's what these workshops are for. I'm afraid that sometimes when we have our board meetings, it might be that the public perceives that we kind of rush through things, well, and maybe they don't know that we've met extensively on Thursday in these workshops. So, but anyway, again today, that's the whole point, is that we can get through these different kinds of items with all the questions and information that will be provided, and with the idea that that will expedite the Monday evening meeting. Doesn't always work that way, but that's the goal. All right. And Mr. Chambers, certainly, sir, if you have items that you would like to discuss, or if you have staff here that you would like to present, please let me know, and we'll go ahead and take care of all that.
Yes, sir.
All right. So before we start off here, I do have some changes to the agenda, and let me go ahead and read those. Administrative personnel appointments. This is item under 2.1. We've added item 6.1. Appointment of specialist human resources. It's on consent agenda. We deleted item ground lease agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County, Florida, and the United States of America by and through the Secretary of the Air Force. And then we'll move on through the rest of the agenda. So, of course, item 1 will be the opening of the meeting. Item 2 will be the approval of the agenda. We're showing no recognitions. We do have a visitor for Monday evening, although was there some thought that he would be here today?
Well, I actually talked to him the other night. He said he was going to be here today. So.
Okay, I'm looking for Nathan Boyles. That ought to be loud enough. I don't see Mr. Boyles. Maybe he'll come in a little bit later, and
yes,
if so, then we certainly will honor his presence and call him forward. In any case, 4.1 says Okaloosa County Commissioner Nathan Boyles, access issues at Florosa and Mary Esther Elementary Schools. All right, Section 5, we don't yet know. Section 6, this is an added item, 6.1, will be the appointment of specialist human resources recommended by the superintendent for approval.
I have a question, just real quick.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant.
As far as the job, you were classified as an assistant superintendent. Will this have that same title, or is it just going to be the specialist title?
This one will be the specialist, and this is a position that was already in the budget that hadn't been filled, but a separate position.
Okay.
Well, I'm taking everybody's good with all that, so let's just move on. Okay. Section 7 will be committee and staff reports, workshop only. 7.1, in-county travel paid for the period of December 13, 2018 through January 9, 2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.2, out-of-county travel paid for the period of December 13, 2018 through January the 9th, 2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.3, quarterly report, short-term facility use contracts and lease agreements under the $5,000 threshold, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing. 7.4, quarterly report, service agreements under the $5,000 threshold for internal and budgetary funds, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, presented by Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing. 7.5, quarterly report, service agreements for law enforcement, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing.
Just for the
Yes,
record,
sir.
Chairman, those are the additional ones, it appears, right?
I believe so, but certainly I would call upon staff to maybe explain those. Ms. Scallon?
Thought maybe we were getting a bargain.
The service agreements are for the law enforcement services, like for games, board meetings, any extra services that are requested, and that's aside from the regular contract for the SROs
yeah.
in the schools.
Thanks.
And I think that's a good question, Mr. Destin, and I think we all know this, and again, for the public's information, you know, we do provide additional school security for various kinds of events, and that's for the protection of our students and their families and our guests and everyone there, and of course those are professional services beyond what the contract provides for, and so because they're professional services, we pay for that additional security. Okay.
So I can't help but notice, Dr. White, we do not have a SRO in here at this particular time. Is there a reason behind that?
I am not aware.
Yeah, so
we,
I
we
know
will find
that,
out.
well, this is timely. I see Commissioner Boyles. I know that Ms. Crawford routinely sends an email notifying the various folks that are in charge of that. And Mr. Bryan, I think you know that in the past I've raised the same question before. So I suspect Mr. Chambers will be talking with Ms. Crawford, and we'll try to figure out what happened in this event. And of course, the law does provide that I am able to appoint a sergeant at arms, and so if necessary, I'll do that. So far, I think we're okay.
Right.
But I'm looking at the attorney, and Mr. Chambers, and Mr. Bryant. Okay. All right, so Commissioner Boyles, we've called you, sir. Good morning. Are you prepared to come forward now and speak?
Absolutely. Yeah, I apologize for walking in
Well,
late.
welcome. No, it's okay. You weren't that
On a
late.
chilly morning out there. How's everybody today?
We're good,
It's a
Commissioner.
good-looking board. It's nice to be on this side for a change as opposed to on that side. I did wanted to take the opportunity to come and visit with y'all. I have the privilege and opportunity to serve as chair of the Okaloosa-Walton TPO. And in that capacity, there's a major kind of study and design process underway for the widening of Highway 98. Not my district, Commissioner Goodwin's district down there on the west side of the county. But I have learned that there are some real traffic challenges, of course, on that corridor. And I understand that some of those challenges are associated with or related to the schools, and in particular, I think, Florosa Elementary. And so in several conversations, I've had conversations with Ms. Kelly and with Mr. Bryant, and it's become apparent that there's probably an opportunity for us to work together to try and see if we can find some way to make some improvements that would benefit school safety, that would benefit would benefit the flow of your parents picking up their students, may also benefit flow along that highway corridor. And so I had the opportunity to come and meet with your new superintendent this past week, and we talked about some of those opportunities, and figured it would be a good thing for me to get here and get in front of this board and simply offer, in my limited capacity as chair of the TPO, to see if we can't pull together some DOT staff, pull together county staff. I know that there have been some staff level discussions already between county staff and school district staff, and I think we can probably accelerate those discussions, in particular with trying to get DOT into the room and see if there's some way we can work together to help relieve that problem. You know, there'll be some complexities here. One is, of course, the bigger picture study that's ongoing right now about potentially 6-laning all or portions of that corridor from Navarre back all the way into Mary Esther. And also, I'm understanding that DOT may have initiated the process for one of their little quick strike projects where they can do small improvements that would help one of their roadways with the extension of a turn lane into that property. We talked about that, Mr. Chambers, and I've got some information from my staff. They're still trying to get that final confirmation from DOT, but they understood DOT was initiating that process. That works outside of the TPO process, doesn't require any TPO approval, and would certainly help, though I don't think that's the end of that discussion, and I don't think that would probably resolve all of the problems there. If I'm understanding, there may be an opportunity to kind of reorient your flow within the district property and get folks out towards the light and maybe make some other enhancements or improvements. The other piece of this, I think you have worked with the legislative delegation in the past about funding for potentially some additional buses. I understand that may be somewhat in question. And I certainly think we'd be happy to participate in that discussion, you know, to the extent there is a physical set of improvements that are a one-time cost that could be implemented. Certainly want you to know that from my perspective, the county would be there and be a partner, and I think certainly the TPO would be there and be a partner to work through that process. Figuring out what to ask for, how to ask for it, and who should be the receiving body, those are always important things, and that discussion needs to move along pretty quickly if that's going to happen within the confines of this upcoming legislative session. So I'll leave it at that. If I can answer any questions, I'm happy to do so. And again, I'm happy to coordinate TPO level to get DOT staff together with your folks and our county folks.
Well, thank you for being here, Commissioner, and
Sure.
we appreciate the partnership that you're offering. Let me turn it over to the other board members if they have questions, or certainly Superintendent, if you have some information that you'd like to share.
And I would have one comment, but I would defer to the board first, and I can say something towards the end.
Okay. Anything?
I was just
Dr.
going
Kelly?
to say, I appreciated our conversation at the public hearing.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
I appreciate opening the opportunity to work collaboratively. Thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Commissioner Watts, can
Yes,
you
ma'am.
remind me what TPO?
Yes, ma'am. So many acronyms
I'm
that float
sorry.
around out there. No, trust me. I fuss at my staff all the time about using too many acronyms, and then I tend to fall into that as well. Transportation Planning Organization.
Okay.
And so the TPO, there are a number of TPOs across the state. Some of them in larger counties are limited to a single county. In other places, they're multiple counties. For us, it's Okaloosa and Walton. Under federal law with regard to federal gas tax expenditures that flow to the state, there are, TPOs have certain oversight over the expenditures of those dollars. And so we function in an advisory capacity to DOT, prioritizing projects through the long-range transportation planning process. And so it was a dense forest for me. It took me 4 or 5 years to even figure out how the process worked. I think I'm finally starting to get my hands around it, but it's a very important process. And so the TPO is made up of elected officials from Okaloosa County, Walton County, and then a number of the cities within our jurisdictions also have membership on the TPO.
So, is it correct that this is state funds that's there? It's just getting them to let it use it for our purpose?
Yes, I think the answer to that in short is yes. You know, the funding becomes very complicated very quickly with DOT, different pots of
It
money, different
usually
colors of
does.
money. That's right, I know. Where is it not complicated, right? One of the benefits that we now have with Highway 98 in that particular segment is that it was designated as a strategic intermodal system piece of infrastructure. And when that designation was made less than a year ago, that opened up a whole separate pot of funding, a statewide pot of funding that our DOT district, the Panhandle District, can now reach into and try and pull some of those dollars out. Whereas before, we were limited more to the district level budget with regard to that Highway 98 corridor. And that's what's pushing some of that discussion and that study process for the 6th laning of that forward now, is that there is a greater source of funding that's out there and that's available.
And so you're being on that, in that organization, okay, the TPO, you know how we can, you know the ways to go about getting that funding, and that's what we need to be working on before the legislative session? Is that what you're saying?
I think you certainly want to be working through the TPO process. I think those are, at times are separate tracks, and so I would say I'd be riding both of those horses, very, very frankly. You know, the legislative process, and one of the things y'all, I'm sure, know this as well as I, and I've learned this specifically in the transportation planning world. Sometimes a legislative allocation that comes out of the legislative session, it certainly is a good thing, but it can often end up being, especially in the context of the transportation budget, it ends up just being an earmark of existing funds. It doesn't end up adding any more money to the pie, and so that can be very frustrating for your DOT district. If they have, and for the TPO, when we've prioritized projects, we've kind of racked and stacked and made difficult decisions, and then from left field a funding directive comes from the legislature, and absent the legislator kind of being in the right spot and being able to actually put in additional money for that project, what effectively happens is a displacement of another priority. And so that's why I say when you're talking about where and how those funds flow, it's important to be mindful of that moving into the legislative process. And I don't pretend to be an expert there, but I think one example maybe if we're talking about some funding to do some improvements on district property would be to strive to have those funds flow through your side of the house, right? So the flow through towards the district as opposed to flowing to the DOT, because if it flows to the DOT, it may well just displace other funding and not necessarily increase the size of that pie. There may be a way then through some partnership that could involve the TPO then to bring those dollars back and say, okay, these are the improvements we need to make on our property, and these are the improvements that need to happen at the intersection to accommodate those improvements on our site.
It is complex.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman,
Good
I might.
questions. Yes, sir, Mr.
I
Dustin.
would just have one comment. Thank you, Commissioner, for coming and talking to us.
Sure.
The superintendent has been working on what we can do to alleviate the problem in a fairly expeditious manner. And I figure the rest of you have spoken to them, and it's going to come up with a price tag of around $400,000, we believe, and our finance director is trying to search around to find that money. So any help the county could give to us, even if we go back to the DOT and say we'll fund it up front, and if we can get a legislative allocation, you can pay us back later. Any of those opportunities would be welcomed. So
Certainly.
thanks for coming, and we look forward to working with you on it.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
And Dr. White, if I could, I'd like to say thank you too. And I know we talked the other night, and my comment was I was really happy to hear you wanting to come and present the team effort, because I feel like the school district unfairly has been put in a corner to come up with a solution to this.
Sure.
And I've said all along that the problem is greater than Floros Elementary School, but at least you're coming to us with a joint team effort, and to me that speaks volumes that, hey, we're going to work together to solve, at least for right now, that part of the problem.
Absolutely.
So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that, and I agree completely.
Mr. Chambers?
And I do appreciate the word complexity that you used, because this is a complex issue.
sir.
But just like our board members, I very much appreciate the partnership and the fact that you were so willing to come and meet and sit down and talk and discuss this, to truly be a partner. I think that's something that I think we all very much appreciate. So just thank you very much.
Absolutely. Look forward to working with you.
Commissioner, that's awesome. We appreciate you coming in.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And Superintendent, I see you have some graphics around the room. Is there something that you'd like to maybe present or talk with us about?
So I know on item 10.1 really addresses this, but
All right.
if you approve,
Yeah,
it might be a good time to do that now.
I think in this situation, we'll just go ahead and move there, because I believe you're going to talk about the same thing that the Commissioner talked about.
Yes, sir.
All right.
And I just wanted to make just a few comments, then I'm going to ask Dr. Bill Smith to come up and give a presentation. But I do want to say I do appreciate the discussion that we had at the last board workshop and board meeting, where we were discussing the buses. And what was requested of me and our staff was to potentially look at what are some other options. So we immediately did that. We had a meeting, we got together, and we put some other options on the table, and you'll see some of those options today in terms of phases. But I do want to say, as we looked at this, the safety of the students, the safety of the employees and our parents was first and foremost, and that's what we looked at. So we want to definitely keep that into consideration. Had a great conversation with Colonel Dorman over at Hurlburt. We do respect their mission and what they're trying to accomplish, so definitely want to take that into consideration. Had several conversations with other community members, such as Commissioner Boyles. We've reached out to Senator Gaynor and Senator Broxton, and as you can imagine, they are quite busy right now in what they're doing. So we do have messages into them, so we got to continue those conversations. We very much appreciate the legislature for going forward with the allocation of the buses. But I do know that we've been asked to look at some other options as well, and that's what we'll do today. We will discuss a phase 1 that would be part of the district, and then a phase 2, which would be a coordinated effort with the county, with DOT, and coming together as a partnership. So if Dr. Smith, you'd come forward and share the specifics, I'd very much appreciate it. And while Dr. Smith is coming up, I do want to thank Ms. Massey who is here from Florosa. I know this is a year-long or even a more than a year-long issue, and she's been great. So I do very much appreciate her being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers, and welcome, Dr. Smith.
Good morning.
Yes.
Commissioner Bowles is completely correct. This is a problem that didn't occur yesterday. We feel like we have put a plan together. That's what we're going to present to you today. As Superintendent Chambers mentioned, it is a phased plan. It will also, like any other problem that you have that you can't solve in one day, it's going to take a period of time to do that also. As previously been mentioned, we have reached out to all the parties involved that are anyway touching this problem, which they're numerous. The first phase of the plan basically is all inclusive in our property. It's the panel over here on your right. It would basically add a turn lane that would turn into the school and give you access from the light back to the parent pickup and drop off.
Dr. Smith,
Yes.
can I just
Yes.
interject one thing? And I know that superintendent and board members and Mr. Attorney, we all know what the problem is. But there might be some viewers that are watching now or might be watching in the future. And so briefly, if we could just have a brief description of what the problem is that we're trying to solve.
What the problem is traffic in front of Florosa Elementary School with the school zone in the mornings and the afternoon, and how people have to get in and out of the school. Right now, as it is today, if you're eastbound on 98 and you want to get into the school, parent and pick up drop off, you have to go past the school, make a U-turn, and come back to get in the line to pick up or drop off your child. What we're trying to do is develop a program on our property that would queue everybody up at the light and eliminate all the U-turns.
Very good.
You have a lot more people coming from the west to the east than you do from the east to the west. So that creates a huge number of U-turns, which is probably maybe 200 or 300 yards past the school as you're going west to east.
And then that impacts
Traffic.
everybody else that's traveling on 98, and it creates a huge traffic jam, a parking lot, if you will, in the afternoons for sure.
It creates two things. It creates an unsafe condition by all those people making those U-turns.
Okay.
And it also slows down traffic with everybody decelerating to make a U-turn where there's no turn lane to queue people up to make that U-turn. So they back out into the road, queued up to make the U-turn, which makes it a one-lane road.
Got it. Anybody else have anything to add to that definition of the problem?
And of course, our connection to Hurlburt is when it makes it a one-lane road, then they can't get their people in and out of the base,
Their mission.
which is a national security problem.
I agree, 1,000%.
So basically what our proposal is in our phase one will be the board to my right,
Okay.
which will create a new entrance from the light. The big picture of the whole phase one is to queue everybody up at the light, which would eliminate the U-turns.
Okay, good.
So everybody would come into the school and leave the school, either buses, parent parking, or parent pickup drop-off would come back through the light,
All right.
which would center the entrance and exit there and eliminate U-turn. That's the
course.
whole objective of phase one.
And I know this, and the board members know this, but again, for the public, are we asking for a new light
No,
from DOT?
No.
So it's an existing light
everything we're doing in phase one is on our property and under our control,
with a light that's already there?
with a light that's already
We
there.
just got to get a road to it.
We just got to get a road to where they can get to that parent pickup drop-off in another entrance other than one that exists now,
Okay.
which is, they're now entering through this road right here, and we would be carrying them back to this road here.
Okay.
And this is the, the TPM proposal that you see in the packet, the $400,000. It's basically two parts. It's the access road to the parent pickup drop-off, but it's also the restructuring of the west side parking lot, which your bus drop-off is there, and also your parking for your school is there. And there's some improvements can be used, that parking lot can be used for in queuing traffic as it leaves.
Okay. So now you said $400,000.
It's a budget.
How do we come up with that number? I mean, road building's not really in our,
We have reached out to our total program manager, and we've acquired those numbers.
okay, all right. I remember we used to have a grounds crew that could lay asphalt and do those kinds of things for us, but I think Mr. Bolton, I see him back there looking, he's shaking his head. That's something that's gone away with the funds decreasing over all these years. So we would be dependent on someone else to build this road to get this done.
That's correct. And remember, it's a TPM budget. We really won't know the final sure lockdown cost until we have a GMP in our hand. Mr. Destin can tell you all about that.
Yeah, and I will try to enlighten us some more during that section. But also, when we get over a certain amount, I think between 200,000 and 300,000, then we automatically go to our construction management people, and at this price, we will be over that amount.
Yes, sir. Okay. All right, so that's good. I'm sorry to
Yes,
interrupt.
that's
I'm just
okay.
trying to
No,
help.
that's good.
Okay.
The next slide, let me go ahead and jump to my slides here a second. Is the same drawing that you're seeing on the screen.
It looks different, but okay.
That's why I brought the boards, is because I brought the boards because it doesn't show very well on the slide.
I understand.
Phase 2 of the project is what we would be doing in the roadway, like you mentioned about the light. All this work would be on DOT's right-of-way. Part of it is, as Commissioner Bowles mentioned, the extension of this turn lane right here back to the east,
Okay.
which would allow this queuing line right here to be longer and have more cars, which is the same purpose as the other, because when that line gets full, it backs out into the lane, which creates another one-lane road. That's the piece that's already in the process of being done that Commissioner Bowles mentioned. Phase 2.
Now, I'm sorry to interrupt again.
Go ahead.
I'll make sure I understand. That's DOT property.
That's DOT property, it's DOT funded and DOT done.
And so they will grant permission for this? I mean, and Commissioner Bowles, I know you're here. Have they already granted permission on that, or how do we do that?
For the small turn lane that we're talking right now, it's
Right.
my understanding and what we've been told, it's already funded and already in process.
That's my understanding as well.
Good.
It's
When are
already
they-
done.
When are they breaking ground? When are they starting?
90 days, Steve?
Have the pre-construction meeting already.
Right.
They estimate 90 days.
Excellent. Okay, great.
And to be honest, I think, Nathan, you maybe know some more about this, but I think they're having the same problem with people turning into those apartment complexes.
Well, I was
That's the other
looking at
reason
that.
why they're extending it.
Okay. I see.
Okay? The second part of the work in the roadway is part that we've been working with the county over. When we redirect the traffic to the light,
Right.
You'll create some problems at the light that need to be addressed, which is additional stacking lane on your eastbound traffic, because you're now, those cars that were making a U-turn are now in that left turn lane. So you've got to probably make a double lane and extend the length of that lane so those cars won't back out into the highway on the light cycle. And also make a double stacking lane going westbound on the lane that we've just extended in this project we've talked about. That's the final part of piece 2. That's the part that's still being worked on.
So you ready for questions? Or-
One more statement.
Okay.
I think what we plan to do is come to the board on Monday night and ask for the board to authorize us to ask for a pre-GMP from Jacobs Titan to be brought back to the board at a meeting in the future. And that's all I have, unless you have questions.
Would that need to be a separate agenda item, or can we just put it under this?
I think he's going to report under 10.1.
All right.
But if we know today that's a request, it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and have the agenda amended to include under 10.1 you know.
A motion, basically.
Yeah, that request to authorize the superintendent to seek a
So,
pre-GMP.
Mr. Chambers, would you get with Ms. Crawford? And of course, we'll approve that to add. And-
Thank you.
And then we can go ahead and move forward with that. Just make sure we get all of our i's and t's taken care of. Okay? All right, Dr. Smith.
Any other questions?
Well, great presentation.
Thank you.
I do, Dr. Smith, real
Yes.
quick. On phase one, if the money's approved and all, about what's the time length to get that done?
In my opinion, this is a project that really needs to be started the last day of school and finished
Right.
the first day of pre-planning. So it's a job that needs to be done in the summer because all of that's going to be demoed and torn up, and you really don't need to be having school at the same time.
Right.
So that's the target that we're after
And that was going to be
for
my
this
suggestion.
summer's project.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, stand by. There may be some other
Yep.
questions.
I wanted to ask Mr. Chambers, when you met with Colonel Dorman,
Yes.
what's his name? Can the Air Force, can they help us with any of this? I understand they have a crew that does these kinds of things, or maybe, is there anything that, any input on this first or second phase that they can do with this?
Yes, ma'am. So I did talk with Colonel Dorman. He did say Red Horse, so I wasn't very familiar with that term.
Yeah.
So I learned about Red Horse. So Red Horse is currently deployed right now. He was willing, if at a later time that they're not deployed and they were able to offer some assistance. I think as we've talked right now, knowing the significance that if we started in the summer, we'd need to finish. So right now we've talked about going through the pre-GMP process, but he did offer Red Horse if they were available, so we'd have to talk about that at that time.
Any indication on helping us financially with that first phase, since it benefits everybody?
That was not a discussion.
Yeah, okay.
Anything else? Board members? Well, Superintendent, I know you have the principal here. I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask, and I take it for granted, when we can get through phase two and we have the bigger and longer stacking bays, will that give us an opportunity to work on the timing on the lights, since, you know, we'd have to have a transportation engineer tell us, but you would think that may open up that possibility, which would quicken the flow even more?
It's my understanding the county controls that light, and that can be modified and altered through Randy Showers.
Good deal.
And Randy's one of the gentlemen we met with the other day that knew about the extension of the turn lane.
Good deal. And as far as our help from our friends at the Air Force, over the last 30 years, I've seen Red Horse do a number of projects, county and the city, and they can actually do a project on down the road that will help us, but that is different than this one, as in lieu of contribution or doing it right now, because they are deployed, and, you know, the rec over in Tyndall, and they're always sending them off, but when they're here, they can do a lot of really interesting things that can offset expenses that we or the county may have down the road, so it all comes out.
Great, good to hear that.
All right, very good. And I know that the principal of La Rosa is here, Ms. Massey, and I suspect you've been involved in all this, and I don't know if there's anything else that...
I see a smile on her face, so.
Yeah.
Well, I will ask Ms. Massey real quick, your parent input and all, have you shared this with them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So my school advisory council's been very involved in this process.
Excellent.
And they're very pleased with
Okay.
the work.
Because I know when it first came up, you had a mass of folks here that were letting us know how they feel, so.
That's right,
All right.
that's right.
All right.
And they like this.
Okay.
Well, again, it was a great presentation, great plan. I appreciate, I know my colleagues appreciate the work and effort, and I believe that there's probably, I'm not sure how many cars pass by La Rosa every day, but there's probably a lot of people that will appreciate the work and the effort that's gone on here, and from the county commissioners and Commissioner Boyles. Okay? Anything else, y'all? Ready to move on?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Smith. All right, so let's go ahead now and go to Section 8, Consent Agenda. 8.1 is the approval of the consent agenda. And as usual, I'll go through each one of these. 8.2, approval of the minutes of student disciplinary hearings of January 10, 2019, minutes of workshop meeting of January 10, 2019. minutes of regular meeting of January 14, 2019, all recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.3, appropriation of District 3 School Board member capital outlay funds to Baker School for a softball scoreboard in the amount of $15,404.84, presented by Mrs. Linda Vancheck and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.4, budget amendment number 4, fiscal year 2018-2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
I had one
Yes, sir.
question, Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I noticed that on a decrease, line 200, I think, was $60,000 or $70,000. Rita, can you just give us a brief explanation? We still, it looks like at the bottom of the list, we still came out ahead, but that reduction there, what causes that?
And I'm sorry, Mr. Dixon, can you tell me which item that was?
I think it was on 200, line 200. I'll have to flip over here and see if I can find it. But I noticed about a $60,000 decrease in funding.
Would it be permissible to come back to this item as she looks for
Absolutely.
that, Mr. Destin? Because I know
Yes, sir.
those documents are lengthy. So,
Yep.
Ms. Scallon, I'll come back to you. Just raise your hand when you've had a chance
See
to
if I
look
can-
at it, okay? And we'll come back to that.
Yeah, it's so
and
small.
I know y'all will help me remember that. All right. 8.5, monthly financial statement for December 2018, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.6, invoices to be approved for payment, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.7, donations, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.8, payroll warrant register and an accounts payable warrant register for December 2018 totaling $36,530,523.86, and bank transfers for December 2019 totaling $21,018,440, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.9, renewal of tag-on bid RFP 151702, dispensing system for general cleaning supplies, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.10, sole source purchase over $25,000 CAE, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.11, schedule service agreement, train, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.12, amendment to service agreement number 19-32, Roy D. Wingo, Jr., presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.13, deleted. That was the ground lease agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County, Florida, and the United States of America by and through the Secretary of the U.S. Air Force, presented by Dr. Bill Smith and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
And Mr. Chairman, we've only taken it off temporarily. We're working through some negotiations with them, and we'll be bringing that back to the board.
Very good, good, good. And board members, you know that pertains to our school there.
That's good.
All right. 8.14, sale and disposal of surplus property, presented by Mr. Steve Bolton, Director of Facilities Planning and Maintenance, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.15, exceptional student education policies and procedures manual, presented by Mrs. Melody Summer, Program Director, Exceptional Student Education, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. A lengthy document, and Mr. Chambers, I see you have Ms. Summer here. I don't know if you're planning the presentation or what we need to do here.
So we could do it either way. I believe she reached out to each of you to give an explanation of any changes or revisions. But if you would like her to come forward, we can do that as well.
Well, let's just see if they have any questions. Any
Yes, sir.
questions, board members, about this particular document?
I was going to compliment Ms. Summer for calling us, and at least, because when I saw that first, I was like, whoa, that's, so she came to the rescue.
Was it
So I'm
109
satisfied.
pages or something like that?
And she is,
Very
when she
lengthy.
called, she assured that everything had already been approved by the state, so everything's in line, so that's good. Good work, thank you.
I did have one question, Chairman.
All right.
And the reason I ask it is to offer whatever support we may need to do if it's budgetary, which is primarily our concern. But on one section, it talked about a 400% increase on student restraints. And there was a nice explanation about how that came about. And Ms. Summers, if you could just give us a quick update on that. And there was also an explanation on how we intended to fix it.
Yes, sir.
And I just wanted to make sure that, you know, as a board, we were ready to help if necessary.
Thank you.
Right, so all restraints and seclusions are required to be reported through the state website. And last year, there was an increase, and the explanation in there was, it was from one particular school, and it related to some new staff employees that required some training, and they have had that training. We have since seen a large decrease for this year. So we are monitoring that closely.
So you think you've got it fixed? Is it a matter of not enough staff or just training, you think?
It was new staff. I don't think it's not enough staff. I think it was training for new staff.
Okay, thanks.
And I just wanted to point out regarding this subject, and maybe you could speak to this, Ms. Summer. There are rules and regulations and state law that dictate how those things are done.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The state has an actual template that we have to follow, and reporting requirements to parents and such.
And so when that's necessary, we follow all of those guidelines.
Yes, sir.
All of those rules, all those laws, and then we even report it to the state on a form.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, very good. All right. Anything else? Thank you. How you doing, Ms. Gallen? You still looking?
And I'm at a loss of looking through the document too, Ms. Cannon. Just give me an opportunity to go back home and look at my notes, and I will get with you.
Yeah,
on
we can
Friday.
do it Monday night if that's.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I may have been looking at the wrong set of documents, who knows?
Okay. All right, so now moving on to 8.16, additional course adoptions for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Julianne Smith, Secondary Curriculum Specialist, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. All right. Section 9, Superintendent's Human Resources Recommendations. 9.1, Employees on Administrative Leave, presented by Mrs. Lindsay Maxey, Program Director, Human Resources, and this is an information item. 9.2, Deferred Retirement Option Program, DROP, presented by Mrs. Lindsay Maxey, Program Director, Human Resources, and this also is only an information item. 9.3, Out-of-Field Report for 2018-2019 school year, presented by Mrs. Karen Peak, Program Director of Professional Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.4, Request to double fill the principal position at Okaloosa STEM Academy, presented by Mrs. Lindsay Maxey, Program Director, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Mr. Chairman, again, you're very good at making sure the public is aware why we would do this. And this is something that if you're sitting out there, you might not understand why we would have two people in a position. But it's my understanding that what happens is you accumulate enough leave that the person can go ahead and not be on the campus, but actually is still employed with the district. And Mr. Chambers, you're a lot more eloquent at speaking to that. But I'd like the public to know, because sometimes I am asked, why do you have two people?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Ms. Maxey can have some of the specifics, but in essence, the principal there, her retirement date is at the end of the school year. The leave that she has accumulated, she's able to leave at the end of March. That's also during, as you know, during the registration time. So it's kind of important that we have a principal in place for a little bit of a transition and to also be a part of the registration, meeting the parents, and having an opportunity to have some time with that principal before they're solo for the rest of the school year.
Plus, this particular school has no assistant, is my understanding, right?
That is correct.
So there would really be nobody there to, as far as administrative, so we want to make sure that's covered. Yeah.
Miss Maxey would have to go over there and fill in if that was the case.
She could do it.
She could.
She could do it.
That must be why she's presenting this item.
That's right.
Must be.
Yeah.
All right.
I just thought that was important
Yep.
that the public understand.
It's a good point. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Badger.
And I would just like to point out that that particular principal is Miss Wanda Avery, who I've known a long time. My kids were under her when she was up in Crestview. When we see people like that leaving, we're happy for them, but it's like, taking part of our family away. And
Absolutely.
So, Miss Avery, if you're watching, we wish you the best, and you've done a great job over at STEM Academy. So.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. All right, so 9.5, request to double fill the athletic director position at Niceville High School, presented by Mrs. Lindsay Maxey, Program Director, Human Resources, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. And Ms. Maxey, I didn't know that head coach was under your, but Mr. Chambers said he might. I heard. Okay.
I have a plethora of talent.
All right, board members, any questions or comments about this one? All right, so let's go ahead and move on then. 9.6, personnel recommendations presented by Mrs. Lindsay Maxey, Program Director, Human Resources, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 9.7, employment separations presented by Lindsay Maxey, Program Director, Human Resources, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 9.8, employee transfers presented by Mrs. Lindsay Maxey, Program Director, Human Resources, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 9.9, reinstatement reimbursement of sick leave due to line of duty illness, injury, medical examination presented by Ms. Lindsay Maxey, Program Director, Human Resources, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 9.10, leave without pay presented by Ms. Lindsay Maxey, Program Director, Human Resources, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. All right, so moving on, discussion agenda. 10.1, legislative budget request LBR for school buses to ease the traffic pattern along Herbert Field, Florosa Elementary School corridor, presented by Mr. Henry Kelly, Program Director, Community Affairs, and recommended by the superintendent for approval, and tabled at the regular meeting of January 14, 2018. So this is why this is coming back up, because that was the date certain when we voted to table this item. Item 10.2, items moved from the consent agenda, if any.
And Mr. Chairman, there'll be I suppose Ms. Crawford will, number 10.3 will be the request for the pre-GMP.
Yes, sir.
So that will be added to that part of the agenda.
Very good, Mr. McInnes. Thank you. All right, so moving on to Section 11, Construction Program Owners Representatives Business. 11.1, Program Status Report by the Board's representative to the construction program. Mr. Destin, do you have something today or for
Well,
Monday?
just briefly, we have a number of task orders here to repair some roofs. And then we have the program to enhance district-wide security upgrade project. Now that one that involves quite a lot of money.
Right.
And we will, I think, and Mr. Bolton, you can help me if you will, we're going to be talking about redirecting some of the roofing money. This is all that one big project, right?
What we will be requesting is after the approval of the pre-GMP, so that we can have this plan basically placed on a shelf for a later date and then request.
Yep, so I'm a step ahead. This is a request to get a construction management estimate on doing this security work for the district, and it totals several $1 million. So.
Can I ask a question about that? And Ms. Callum, this pertains to, I guess, finance. So, and I heard about roofing money and those kinds of things. Have we yet received the allocation for these funds? I heard Mr. Destin say several $1 million. Are we waiting to receive these funds, or how's that work?
Okay, the first item that's dealing with the roofing,
Yes, ma'am.
in the current year budget, the board had approved an
Right.
allocation of 1.5 million,
Okay.
approximately, to replace the roofs at those particular schools, those particular buildings. But since that time, what happened was we had Hurricane Michael, and the market cost of replacing roofs has escalated. So the discussion was that the prudent thing to do would be to go ahead and request a pre-GMP to go ahead and have those roofs engineered, designed, and have the plans ready to go when the market cost returns to normal, because that way you'd be ready to go. The structure, the configuration of the roofs are not going to change. So you'd have that on the shelf, and hopefully next budget year, maybe the market will start coming back down, and so you'd be ready to go with those.
Very prudent.
So,
We get more money, we get more for our buck.
yes,
That's what it
sir.
amounts to.
Yes, sir. And so what would happen was, I think in the discussion with Mr. Destin and the other district staff on the construction work group, was that we would request to move, basically, you'll wind up with about $1.3 million left that you had appropriated for roofing projects, to go ahead and move those to help with the security enhancements that are needed. So that 1.3 would move there. You already have $723,000 that you have budgeted for single point of entry. So those two paired together would get you to what's on the agenda, the $2 million and something, to go ahead and be able to get a pre-GMP and move forward with that.
Okay.
Now, we just got 2 days ago, I just got the project award notification for the $1,092,000 from the state. You know, remember the security. So between the $2 million and the basically 1.1, you'd be at about $3.2 million that you have, that you could move forward on security enhancement,
Okay.
single point of entries, those kinds of things. And then you still have your $723,000 budgeted for fencing. So at some point,
Okay.
once there's some suggestions, recommendations, you might even pair that with the 3.2, and then you'd be about $4 million.
Wow.
Okay.
Excellent.
And so the benefit of all that is that we can go ahead quicker with the
Yeah.
security
Yeah.
measures. And thank you, Rita, for explaining that
Yep.
much more clear than I would have.
That's right.
Good job. Thank you, Mrs. Scallon. Okay. All right, anything else, Mr. Destin, on that item?
I think that covers it.
Okay. All right. 11.2 would be TPM program number 6, task order number 1, pre-GMP roof replacement projects at Edge Elementary School, STEM Academy, and Crestview High School, presented by Mr. Steve Bolton, Director of Facilities Planning and Maintenance, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 11.3, TPM program number 6, task order number 2, pre-GMP district-wide school security upgrade project, phase 1, presented by Mr. Steve Bolton, Director of Facilities Planning and Maintenance, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And in this particular item, there was no attachment, but I suspect that has something to do with the law regarding security measures and that kind of thing. Mr. McInnes, would you speak to that just briefly?
Yes, sir. The particulars of our security enhancement plans are not subject to public release, for the reason that we are trying to protect those security measures for the schools, and so that's why there's not an attachment there. Certainly, any board member can get with the facility staff and see those plans, but we don't disclose those plans publicly.
And that is the case. They're available for inspection by school board members. And Mr. Bolton, I'm sure, or Mr. Makoutsaratis can facilitate that for you.
All right, excellent. Excellent. Okay, well, seeing no further comment, let's keep moving. Section 12, Information Technology, no business there. Section 13, Mr. Attorney.
No
you may
report
have some
today.
today, but you may have some Monday
Yes,
as
sir.
well. Superintendent, you've got some out-of-state student trip requests. I saw those. And then 14.2 would be any business that you might have for us today, sir. We certainly would appreciate hearing it.
Thank you. And I do have a few things. I do want to go back to the last school board meeting where we talked about having a strong partnership with our school board, excellent communication with the school board. So one of the things that we will be doing is just to let you know, each member of the senior staff will have a board member, and they will call that board member each week and just ask you a question. Do you have any questions? How are things going? So that'll be just a direct contact for you. Now, of course, if it's something dealing with transportation, something dealing with maintenance on a school board agenda item, those individuals will still contact you as always, but just to have that person there for you and us to have strong communication, just think is important and want to do that. Another item, met with a lot of parents over the last almost 2 weeks. Met with a lot of ESC parents over the last 2 weeks, as well as community. Just want to let you know those meetings are going well. The purpose of it is for me to listen, get a lot of input. We've taken a lot of notes, and there'll be some things that we'll do as we go forward based on the input. But I very much appreciate the parents and the community members who have met with us. There's a lot of positives that are shared, and there are some things that we can do better. And so I very much appreciate those. Do want to just share with you one of the things that we are looking at, and we'll talk about in our senior staff meeting today. I am looking at a review of departments, procedures, policies. So for example, HR, we will be looking at all the policies and procedures that are in HR, and are there things that we can enhance, revise, strengthen? We'll do so. The same thing with ESC, for example. I will share with you, with ESC, I have reached out to the Department of Education. I've reached out to Commissioner Corcoran, and I've asked him to look at our ESC programs and share with us what some of the strengths might be of what we have going on here in Okaloosa County, but as well as some recommendations for improvement. So we are in communication with the Department of Education to do that. And
well, can I just add there, Mr. Chambers?
Yes, sir.
And I've been around for a long time, and I remember, if I remember correctly, that's something that we did once before, long ago. So that's great, and I appreciate you taking that initiative to ask DOE to give us some guidance.
Thank you. And then the last piece, just on this topic, will be just once again, we'll be talking with our departments, and I'm going to ask them to give me recommendations for any revisions or changes that need to be made within the areas in terms of policies, procedures, if any. But definitely want to do a review of what we are doing. And then lastly, an exciting piece, I've had a conversation with Representative Ponder. With your approval, what we would like to do is make a legislative request to Mr. Ponder, and he is in agreement. We want to look at our CTE programs. So one of the pieces that I would really, if you'd permit me, have Mr. Horton come up and give some specifics, but we want to look at an elementary program where we focus on coding, but then also look at a high school program that would focus on airframe and power that goes with our manufacturing. So something we're kind of excited about and we could have an opportunity to do, but Mr. Horton is a lot more eloquent and understanding of that process.
There's your cue.
Good morning. So as the mouthpiece, but not the architect, of course, April Branscombe in our CT program, and David Johnson, who works as well there, have done a lot of legwork on this and communicating with local partnerships and foundations to create some things and some opportunities for our kids. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is pushing down rigor in terms of coding, programming, manufacturing concepts into the elementary school level. And so we're looking at coding academies and the opportunity to request funding, which would be one-time funding to bring in some additional devices in our elementary schools, work with not every elementary school initially, but robotics kits, programmable pieces, and get those things embedded in our fourth grade classrooms. We've got great feedback from Dr. Shu's organization, the Shu Foundation, about partnering with us on this. We're very careful. We will be very careful if the board considers it the funding request that does not necessarily obligate the school district to ongoing funds. So we'd be looking very carefully to say, this is the legislative ask, and we don't see an ongoing cost to the district beyond that. One of the interesting things we'd like to do at that grade level is April right now is looking at digital tools certificates that these students can earn. They're not quite the same as industry certifications, but they actually provide funding back to the school district when those students are successful there. So it's an exciting opportunity to do that. These coding academies would be in our schools, embedded in our schools. We'd have training programs in place and let schools decide where, in what subject area or what part of the day it would best fit. So we're very excited about that. The second piece of it is, you may know that we have for a few years had a manufacturing program ongoing housed at Northwest Florida State College. And our instructor, Michael Lemai, is one of the finest that I've seen. He is absolutely a magnet for that type of program and getting kids to take part in it. But we have been transporting students from Crestview, Niceville, Fort Walton, and Choctaw to Northwest Florida daily to take part in those courses as a centralized program. It's possible that a legislative funding request could provide us with funding for equipment that would allow us to do potentially 2 locations for this and fine-tune those programs so that they dovetail into the A&P career field. And so there's certainly some programs, and a lot of this still, in terms of the organization, needs to be fleshed out, but we want to strengthen that manufacturing program so that there is an 11th and 12th grade component that could potentially be dual enrollment, could potentially be operated on shared facilities like they are now. Some of that piece needs to be worked out still, but I think the legislative ask would take all those things into consideration and also have partners standing with us that say that it's a good thing for our students, it's a good thing for the jobs that are in this area. And so that's kind of in a nutshell what we would be looking at doing, and potentially, because of timelines, looking to get some of that information to you early. You may know that there's a deadline, I think, of the 3rd of February to get these legislative funding requests in. I think Mr. Chambers coming into his position, some of this kind of generated at that moment. So we've been working on a short timeline, and we'd like to be able to bring that to you Monday for consideration if possible.
Okay. So another agenda item, or?
Yes, sir. I think if it's under the superintendent's business, it could be there, or you can add it to the agenda if they're going to be ready to present and have something to you by Monday night.
Well, I mean, I'm suspecting that you're going to be wanting a motion for this.
That's my understanding.
I think it probably ought to be added to the agenda then. Okay.
Just
so
add it under Section 10.
I'm getting some affirmation, so I think so. That'll be fine if that's good with the superintendent, because it'll be under his recommendation.
I would appreciate it.
All right. All right then.
And I'd be committed to trying to get board members, or we'd get board members some information before the weekend, so
That's
that
what I was gonna say. Can
so
we
you
get
have the
something?
weekend to take a look. We have some things right now, but we absolutely want to get you something.
But this is an imposed deadline because of the requirement to get this thing submitted. It's not.
Correct.
It's not.
Correct.
That's
Yes,
the
sir.
issue. Right. Okay. All right then.
And Mr. Horton, back on the STEM with the elementary, back on the piece, would that be just certain elementaries doing that? Or are we looking at trying to get as many involved? Or you said 4th grade.
Yes, ma'am. So when you begin a program like this, sometimes it's prudent to, at least in the first year, start out with a selected number of schools, and those would probably, they would be geographically dispersed. We look at schools based on making sure we cover a wide range of students. And so the idea right now is potentially 6 elementary schools, which could affect up to 900 students the first year. But certainly that program could grow and develop. And, Mr. Chambers had a chance to speak with Representative Ponder, but the success that we can show in that first year might springboard us to additional potentially funding requests or other ways to work this program. So that's what I would say about that. I don't expect that it would be full implementation through all fourth grade the first year.
And we feel confident we have the teachers who can handle the programs and.
Yes, so and the training piece of that is something that we would set up and articulate. Now, based on the legislative session, I'm not proposing that this necessarily begins next fall, because sometimes those pieces just take time. There's time for the training to occur. So, you know, if I'm being conservative, I'd say it would be for the following school year. In this first year, we'd get all of the purchases and equipment made, the training done. I've had great feedback from those principals when I kind of put it out to a straw vote that we were looking for a few schools, and they were all about this. Because what's happening right now, Ms. Ivanchek, is there are teachers taking the onus right now to do some things with coding and programming in their classroom. There are a lot of great websites. I was given one, and I spent half of one afternoon coding blocks and making little things happen on the screen, and there was no account, no cost to it for me. So there's some pieces of that are out there. One of the things we're talking about now is actually physical components and kits that those students can program. Some of it's magnetic based, but they can work and make things light up and see success and error and go back and go through that engineering process. So it's a long answer to the question. But
No, that's good. That's good information. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent.
And I would just like to comment, you know, being a big proponent of CTE programs, you know, starting them off that early has proven, and we've seen that. We have schools out there, elementary, I could say Bob Sykes Elementary, for one, was a leader in robotics. I mean, they were one of the tops. So, you know, getting these programs into these students' hands earlier will help them develop it, and, you know, will help them maybe find a career that's going to be beneficial to them and to our community. So I think it's an exciting thing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, excellent.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Orton. Anything else, Mr. Chambers?
That is it, and I appreciate it.
All right, you bet. All right, so now we come to the section 15. This will be board members' announcements and requests for information. And so, Mr. Destin, I'll start with you, sir.
Okay, I don't have any announcements. I do want to take the opportunity once again to thank the superintendent and staff for working on the solution in front of Floral Rosa. They pulled a lot of good stuff together really quickly, and I appreciate it.
Very good. Mr. Bryant?
Just two things. Just want to make a reminder that next Thursday we'll be doing Teacher of the Year, and I sat on that committee, and I will tell you that it was a really a great experience. And you know, being tasked with trying to select one of those three was hard, but you know, it just reflects how many great teachers we have in our school district. And also, as being the FSBIT trustee, we had a meeting here recently, and I had Russ print up or send me an email, and if it's okay, I'm gonna forward it to y'all. But just one of the things I wanted to point out was we had a school board member from Citrus County actually do a presentation about school safety. And what was interesting about the school board member is that he is a retired sheriff's deputy from Citrus County. And to hear his insight as a board member was really interesting, and you know, talking about safety as a whole. And you know, it was really just a great piece of information for us. It was about an hour-long presentation, and I will say that our wonderful Sheriff Ashley was complimented in this presentation as being a leader for school safety. So shout out to our great sheriff there. And also, just to kind of give the board a look into the future here, property renewal outlook with the 3 major hurricanes that we've had over the last 3 years. I am going to tell you that FSBIT is looking at increases in property renewal, but they are working diligently to get the best price. And again, I'll share this with you. I'll have Ms. Crawford send this out to you.
Well, yeah, and that insurance matter probably will not just be affecting schools.
No.
Right, no, I get it. All right, Dr. Kelly?
Well, I do have several. One, also on that Thursday, not only do we have a big evening that night with the Teacher of the Year banquet, but that day is the science fair out at the fairgrounds. So take advantage of going and seeing what those bright young minds are doing with their projects. But also, since Terry is here, I wanted to brag that we had our first meeting of the School Health Advisory Committee, the SHAC committee, and I learned a lot there. I thought I already knew a lot about school health, serving as a school principal and working with our nurses and that kind of thing, but a lot of great statistics about what is being done to reduce student weight, health, diabetes, all kinds of training that is being done for our people in the name of student health, and to me that's very important, so thank you for the job you're doing. Also, I just wanted to say, to honor the memory of some of our legacy leaders who've served in Okaloosa County. We lost in the last several weeks Gerald Roper, whom I had the opportunity of working with at Bruner Middle School. He was on our staff, but then became one of our forward-leading homebound teachers. So he served 40 years in our district, passed away a couple of weeks ago. And then, of course, we lost a principal who served at Crestview High School for 20 years, and his daughters, several of them were in education, Ronnie Davis, who was a colleague of ours. And then, of course, former Superintendent Cover. So I just wanted to mention and to honor those families who had served graciously over many years in this district. And that was all I had.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Ms. Vanchek?
Yes, sir. I have a couple things here. First of all, I sat on the committee to choose the Educational Support Employees of the Year, and we got to announce those the other day. I got to go with Superintendent Chambers. So exciting to go and visit with these, and I'd like to announce that it's Mr. Thomas Ballard at Mary Esther Elementary, Mr. Steve Stuth at Plu Elementary, and Miss Angel Squire at Edge are the finalists, and one of them will be named Support Person of the Year come February when we have our breakfast. So that's exciting. Always great to go to those schools, and they're so humble. They're like me. It's so great to go and do that. Very exciting time this week where we saw Representative Matt Gates give his recommendations for Academy students. That's always a great thing. We got to do that. Want to remind everybody that this Saturday is the all-county band performance. It's at the Maddie Kelly Arts Center at Northwest Florida State. All the top musicians in our district will be there. These students do an incredible job. That's at 2 o'clock and it's free. We just want you to come and support those students. Also saw something earlier today out of our Sheriff's Department, our great Sheriff's Department. They named Deputy Cullen Corian, I believe I'm saying his name correctly, as the School Resource Officer of the Year. I mean, we have a top program with that SRO program in the state, and I would like to congratulate him for his work over at Liza Jackson. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think you board members did a good job. We just about covered everything. But as our friend used to say, I've already talked too much. So we'll go ahead and move on from here. 16.1 would be any public comment we might have, and then 17 would be adjourned. So with that, board members, unless you have anything else we need to talk about, or Superintendent, Mr. McInnes, I think we're probably good.
Yes, sir.
Going through these various items. So with that, workshop's over.